You've probably heard it said that the first casualty of war is truth, but there's another, maybe even more immediate victim. When a war begins, the first thing to die is not people. The first thing to die is money. Think about it. In 1914 and then again in 1939, the world just burst into flames. Millions were sent to the front lines, entire cities were leveled. But behind all that chaos, there was this giant unspoken question. Where on earth did the money for all of this come from? I mean, did governments just suddenly hike up taxes on everybody? Or were there printing presses secretly working around the clock, just churning out cash? Who actually footed the bill? Was it the banks, ordinary people, or the very countries being invaded? We have to ask these questions because here's the thing, you cannot understand modern history without knowing. Wars aren't really won with bullets, they're won with money. So today, we are pulling back the curtain on the price of total war, the untold financial story of how World War I and World War II were actually paid for. All right, so first things first, we need to talk about why paying for a war is a completely different beast than, say, building a bridge or a highway. It really boils down to this perfect storm of three huge pressures that just tear up the normal economic rulebook. First, you've got speed. You need staggering amounts of money, and you don't need it next quarter. You need it now. Then there's the sheer scale. We're talking about costs that make any peacetime budget look like pocket change. And the real kicker? Uncertainty. You have no clue if the war is going to last 6 months or 6 years. So you can't even guess the final price tag. This combination forces nations to take some absolutely massive financial risks. And that brings us to our first huge case study, World War I. This wasn't just another war. It was the first truly industrial-scale conflict, and it came with a bill the likes of which the world had never, ever seen. To cover these costs, countries basically threw the kitchen sink at the problem. Yeah, they raised taxes, but that was a drop in the bucket. So they turned to their own citizens. They launched these huge campaigns for war bonds, making it seem like your patriotic duty to lend your life savings to the government. And when even that wasn't enough, they took out massive international loans and, in the most desperate moments, they just started printing more money. And right here, this is a pivotal moment in history. While Europe was financially bleeding out, the United States, which was still neutral, stepped onto the world stage as the planet's new creditor. It loaned unbelievable sums of money to the Allies, a move that didn't just bankroll the war, it permanently yanked the center of global finance from London to New York. That's a shift we are still living with today. Now, fast forward just 2 decades later, and the world is at it again. But this time was different. The painful financial lessons of the First War had been learned. For World War II, countries didn't just fund the fight, they completely rebuilt their entire economies around one single purpose: total victory. The change in strategy was massive. World War I was largely paid for with a buy now, pay later kind of vibe, relying on huge amounts of debt and hoping the losers would eventually cover the costs. But in World War II, the Allies went all in from the get-go. They brought millions of new people into the tax system. They ran these slick, Hollywood-produced bond drives. And the government took direct control of industries to churn out the war machine. It was truly total economic warfare. So what about Nazi Germany? They were forbidden from rearming by the treaty that ended the First War. So how did they secretly build one of the most terrifying militaries in history? The answer is this piece of dark financial genius called the Mefo Bill. It was basically a phantom IOU scheme. The government ordered tanks and planes, but paid the factories with these special bills from a shell company. This kept the spending completely off the public books. It was a secret, phantom budget building a very real war machine. The Allies, meanwhile, had their own game-changing trick up their sleeve: Lend-Lease. By 1941, Britain was on the verge of bankruptcy, so the U.S. came up with this brilliant workaround. Instead of lending money, they would just lend the equipment: guns, planes, ships, food. This was the lifeline that kept Britain and the Soviet Union in the fight, and it's how America became known as the arsenal of democracy. So when you strip it all down, it turns out that a government at war has a surprisingly small playbook. There are really only 4 tools in the financial toolbox, and every single one of them comes with a painful trade-off. Okay, here's the menu of options. You can tax your people. That's the most direct way, but it's slow and, let's be honest, deeply unpopular. You can issue debt through war bonds, which gets you a ton of cash really fast, but you're basically just handing the bill to future generations. Then there's the big red button, just printing more money. You get cash instantly, but you risk unleashing hyperinflation that can destroy your economy from the inside out. And finally, the ugliest tool of all, plunder. Just taking what you need from the lands you conquer. It's fast, but it's illegal and morally catastrophic. And this brings us to what might be the most crucial point. These aren't just abstract numbers or economic theories. Every single one of these high-level financial choices has a very real, very painful impact on ordinary people. Because the bill for war always comes due, and it's paid for on the home front. Take a look at this number. After World War I, Germany tried to pay its debts by just printing money. The result was hyperinflation so out of control that by late 1923, a single loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. People's entire life savings vanish into thin air, literally overnight. That is the devastating price of reckless war finance. Because in the end, it's always the citizen who contributes, one way or another. You pay the price when you hand over your savings for a war bond. You pay it with tax rates you've never seen before in your life. You pay it in the grocery store with strict rationing on everything from sugar to tires. And you pay it when the money in your pocket becomes worthless because of inflation. So after the fighting stops, after the treaties are signed and the parades are over, who actually gets stuck with the final check? The tough truth is, the real price of war isn't paid off in years, but over generations. You can see this story playing out across the 20th century. The financial wreckage of World War I, with its insane levels of debt and reparations, helped create the toxic environment that led directly to the Great Depression. The world's leaders learned from that disaster. After World War II, they took a totally different approach. They created a whole new global financial system, the IMF and the World Bank, to prevent that kind of collapse from ever happening again. And the US launched the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, understanding that a stable economy is the best defense against another war. And that leaves us with this final, sobering thought. The tactics change. You go from patriotic war bonds to secret MIFO bills, from huge loans to just taking what you want. But the one constant is that every single war has a price. And the most important question we can ever ask is, who really pays it in the end? If you found this look into the hidden side of history as fascinating as we did, do us a huge favor and hit that like button and follow for more explainers like this one. Thanks for watching.